You can tell a lot about a person by how they treat someone they don't have to notice. The chandelier light shimmered across the ballroom like liquid gold, catching on crystal glasses, polished shoes, and the quiet confidence of people who never checked price tags. Victoria Hale stood near the center of it all, poised, composed, her presence pulling attention without asking for it. Conversations softened when she passed. Eyes followed. Not out of curiosity, but calculation. She was the kind of woman people prepared for before speaking. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, precise, measured, each step echoing just slightly beneath the live string quartet humming in the background. Everything in the room was controlled. Timed. Perfect. Almost. Somewhere behind the velvet curtains lining the service corridor, a tray shifted slightly out of rhythm. Not loud enough to turn heads. Not important enough to matter. But Marcus Reed noticed. He always did. He stood near the edge of the room, dressed in a simple black and white waiter's uniform, blending into the architecture of the evening. Invisible by design. His hands steady. His posture quiet. He moved when needed, stopped when not, like he understood the rhythm of a room he wasn't invited into. But something felt off. Not danger. Just wrong. A fraction of a second. A glass placed too close to the edge of a passing tray. A heel catching the slightest uneven seam in the floor. Victoria didn't see it. She was mid-turn, responding to someone behind her, her attention divided the way it always was. And then it happened. Not a fall. Not a scene. Just a shift. Her balance tilted forward, subtle but enough, the kind of movement that could turn into something worse in a room full of sharp edges and fragile glass. Marcus moved before the moment finished forming. No hesitation. No announcement. Just motion. One step. Then another. His hand didn't grab. Didn't pull. It hovered just enough to guide, to steady without crossing a line. A quiet correction. Like adjusting something that almost broke but didn't. Victoria's body stilled. Her heel found the ground again. The tray passed behind her untouched. No glass shattered. No voices raised. The music never stopped. For a second, the world narrowed to the space between them. She looked at him. Really looked. Not at the uniform. Not at the role. At him. Marcus stepped back. Immediately, as if erasing himself from the moment the second it was no longer needed. You're okay, ma'am, he said, voice low, even, already turning slightly away. No smile. No expectation. Just a statement. Victoria blinked, her breath catching not from fear, but from the unfamiliar stillness he left behind. People around her continued talking, laughing, unaware anything had almost happened. That was the strange part. Nothing had happened. And yet, something had. She straightened her posture, smoothing a hand over her dress out of habit, her mind already trying to categorize what just occurred. A waiter. That's all. But her eyes drifted back to him anyway. He had already returned to his place along the wall, lifting another tray, moving with the same quiet precision as before. Like the moment didn't belong to him. Like he hadn't just altered the course of it. Victoria's fingers tightened slightly around her glass. Not enough for anyone to notice. Just enough for her to feel it. And for the first time that night, the room didn't feel perfectly controlled anymore. Victoria did not move right away. Not because she could not, but because something about the moment refused to release her. The music continued. Laughter rose and fell in soft waves around her. A server passed by with champagne. Someone mentioned her name across the room. Still, she stood there for half a second longer than necessary, her mind catching up to something her instincts had already registered. It had been precise. Not dramatic. Not attention-seeking. Just enough. She turned slightly, eyes scanning the room again, but not for investors or partners this time. For him. Marcus Reed moved along the perimeter like he had never left it. Tray balanced. Shoulders relaxed. No urgency. No pride. Just work. The kind that disappeared the moment it was done. Victoria took a slow breath, steadying herself fully now. She had recovered. Of course she had. That is what she did. Recover. Adjust. Move forward. She stepped toward a nearby cluster of guests, her expression returning to its usual composed neutrality. Someone greeted her. She responded. Words were exchanged. Deals hinted. Smiles performed. But something small had shifted beneath it all. A quiet misalignment. She nodded at something someone said, though she did not quite hear it. Her attention flickered, just once, back toward the edge of the room. He was there again, refilling. Glasses at a side table, his movements efficient, almost rhythmic. There was no trace of what had just happened. No glance in her direction. No pause. As if saving her had been no different than adjusting a misplaced fork. Victoria felt something unfamiliar press lightly against her chest. Not discomfort. Not exactly curiosity. Something quieter. Less defined. She excused herself from the conversation with a brief, polite smile and stepped away before anyone could question it. Her heels carried her across the floor again, slower this time, more deliberate. Not toward the center. Toward the edge. Toward him. Marcus noticed her approach before she reached him. Not by sight, but by the shift in the room. Conversations softened slightly. Space adjusted. It was subtle, but consistent. He turned just enough to acknowledge her presence without assuming anything more. Victoria stopped a few feet away. Not too close. Not distant either. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was not awkward. It was simply there. She studied him again, this time without interruption. The uniform was clean but worn at the edges. His hands steady. His posture neither submissive nor assertive. Just, grounded. You stepped in earlier, she said finally, her voice calm, controlled, but quieter than usual. Marcus gave a small nod. You were about to lose your balance, he replied. No embellishment. No attempt to elevate the moment. Just the truth, left simple. Victoria's fingers rested lightly against the stem of her glass. Most people would have made it obvious, she said. Or made a scene. Marcus shifted the tray slightly in his hand. Did not seem necessary, he answered. That was it. No follow-up. No expectation of thanks. The absence of it hung in the air, not as pressure, but as space. Victoria felt it. The difference. She glanced briefly at the tray, then back at him. What is your name? She asked. Marcus, he said. A beat passed. Then, Reed. She nodded once, as if filing it somewhere she did not yet understand. Around them, the evening continued exactly as it had before. But for Victoria Hale, something no longer fit as neatly as it had an hour ago. And she could not quite put it back. Victoria did not realize how long she had been standing there until someone called her name from across the room again, sharper this time, pulling her back into the version of herself everyone expected. She turned slightly, acknowledging the voice with a brief lift of her hand, but her attention did not fully follow. It lingered. Not on the conversation waiting for her. On him. Marcus had already resumed moving, stepping past her with quiet precision, offering a glass to another guest without interrupting their conversation, without inserting himself into their world. It was seamless. Practiced. Invisible. Victoria watched the way people accepted the drink without looking at him, without pausing, without even noticing the person holding the tray. And for the first time, she noticed that. Not just him. The pattern. The absence. She shifted her weight slightly, her posture still composed, but her focus no longer scattered across the room. It narrowed. She took a slow step back, not toward the center of attention, but toward a quieter corner near one of the tall windows. The city stretched out beyond the glass, lights blinking steadily in the distance, cars moving like quiet lines of motion far below. It was a view she had seen 100 times. Controlled. Predictable. Owned. Yet tonight, it felt distant. She lifted her glass but did not drink. Her reflection stared back faintly in the window, layered over the skyline, composed as always. Perfectly arranged. And still, something did not settle. Behind her, the rhythm of the room continued unchanged. Deals forming. Laughter rising. Glasses clinking. But her mind returned, again and again, to a moment that had barely lasted 2 seconds. Not because of what he did, but how he did it. No announcement. No recognition. No shift in posture afterward. As if the moment had never belonged to him at all. Victoria exhaled slowly, lowering her glass without tasting it. She turned her head just slightly, enough to see him again in the reflection of the window instead of directly. It felt easier that way. Less exposed. Marcus paused briefly at a service station near the wall, setting down an empty tray, replacing it with another. His movements were efficient, economical. Nothing wasted. Nothing exaggerated. A rhythm built from repetition, from necessity, from understanding where he stood in a room like this. And yet, there had been no hesitation earlier. That was what unsettled her. People like him were supposed to wait. To observe. To stay within lines that others drew for them. But he had stepped forward. Without asking. Not to be seen. Not to prove anything. Just because it needed to be done. Victoria's fingers tightened slightly around the stem of her glass again, a small, unconscious reaction she did not notice this time. A memory surfaced, uninvited. Boardrooms. Decisions made in seconds. People evaluated, categorized, moved like pieces across a table. Efficiency had always been her strength. Precision. Control. And yet, this had not fit into any category she recognized. Not strategy. Not ambition. Something else. Something quieter. Behind her, a man approached, beginning to speak about an upcoming acquisition, his tone confident, practiced. Victoria turned toward him automatically, her expression resetting, her voice ready to respond. She listened. She nodded. She even replied. But somewhere between his second and third sentence, she realized she was not tracking the numbers he mentioned. Not following the projections. Her attention slipped again, not dramatically, just enough to matter. When the man finished speaking, waiting for her response, Victoria paused for half a second too long. Then she gave a measured answer, precise enough to satisfy him, even if her mind had not fully been there. He smiled, reassured, and moved on. She did not. Her gaze drifted once more across the room, this time directly, no reflection, no distance. She found him again. Marcus Reed. Standing exactly where he needed to be. Doing exactly what was expected of him. Nothing more. Nothing less. And yet, somehow, more than anyone else in the room. The room had not changed, but Victoria felt as though she was standing slightly outside of it now, like she had stepped half an inch to the left of a world she used to move through without thinking. The music continued its steady rhythm, soft violin notes weaving through conversations that never quite stopped, but the sound felt distant, like it was coming from behind glass. She placed her untouched drink on a passing tray without looking, her fingers releasing it with quiet precision. No one noticed. They rarely did. That had always been the point. Control meant invisibility when it was needed. But tonight, invisibility belonged to someone else. Her eyes found Marcus again, not because she was searching this time, but because she already knew where he would be. Near the edge. Always near the edge. He was speaking quietly to another staff member now, something brief, practical, a small exchange. That ended as quickly as it began. No laughter. No lingering. Just coordination. Then he moved again, stepping back into the flow of the room without leaving a trace behind. Victoria felt that same quiet pressure return, not uncomfortable, just persistent, like a question she had not yet formed. She turned away from the window fully now, letting the city lights disappear behind her, and took a few slow steps along the perimeter of the ballroom. Not toward the center. Not toward the people waiting for her attention. Just, along the edge. The marble beneath her heels felt different somehow. Or maybe she did. A server passed by, offering a fresh glass. She declined with a slight shake of her head. Another guest approached, beginning a conversation she had already had 3 times that night in different words. She listened. She responded. She nodded at the right moments. But the rhythm felt rehearsed in a way it never had before. Predictable. Replaceable. As if any version of her could stand there and say the same things. And that thought stayed longer than it should have. When the conversation ended, she did not immediately move to the next one. Instead, she paused. Just long enough to notice the silence between interactions. Just long enough to feel it. Across the room, Marcus adjusted a chair that had been pushed slightly out of alignment. It was a small thing. No one had asked him to do it. No one would thank him for it. But he did it anyway, straightening the line of the table with a subtle push, making the space feel ordered again without anyone realizing it had been off. Victoria watched that. Not the action itself. The absence of recognition after it. He did not look around to see if anyone noticed. He did not pause. He simply moved on. Something in her chest shifted again, quieter this time, but deeper. She had spent years building a world where everything had a purpose, where every action connected to an outcome, where value was measured, tracked, proven. And yet here was something that existed outside of that system entirely. No transaction. No visibility. Just, done. She took another step, then another, until she found herself closer to him again without deciding to be. Marcus sensed her presence before he turned. Not startled. Just aware. He faced her with the same calm. Neutrality as before, tray balanced, posture steady. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The space between them held something unspoken, not tension, not expectation, just awareness. Victoria glanced briefly at the row of perfectly aligned chairs behind him, then back at his face. "You fixed that," she said, her voice softer now, less formal than it had been earlier. Marcus followed her glance for a fraction of a second. "It was off," he replied simply. Victoria nodded, though the answer did not quite satisfy what she had meant. Or maybe it did, and that was the part she did not understand yet. She studied him again, more carefully this time, as if trying to see where the edges of him were. The limits. The reasons. "Do you always notice things like that?" she asked. Marcus shifted the tray slightly, considering the question for a brief moment. "Only the ones that matter in the moment," he said. No emphasis. No philosophy. Just a quiet truth, spoken like it did not need to be anything more. Victoria felt that sentence settle somewhere deeper than she expected. Not because of what it meant, but because of how easily he said it. As if it was obvious. As if everyone moved through the world that way. She exhaled slowly, her shoulders lowering just a fraction, almost unnoticeable. Around them, the ballroom continued exactly as it had before. But inside that small space between a billionaire CEO and a waiter no one else was watching, something had begun to shift in a way that could not be measured, only felt. Victoria did not respond right away. Not because she did not have an answer, but because for once, she was not trying to control the direction of the moment. His words lingered. Only the ones that matter in the moment. It sounded simple. Almost obvious. And yet, it unsettled something she had spent years building her life around. Because in her world, everything mattered. Everything was measured. Forecasted. Accounted for. There was no room for, just the moment. She glanced down briefly, her fingers brushing lightly against the fabric of her dress, a small grounding gesture she did not consciously register. When she looked back up, Marcus had already shifted his weight slightly, ready to move again, as if the conversation had naturally reached its end. That, too, caught her off guard. No attempt to extend it. No subtle effort to stay. He simply allowed it to finish. "Wait," she said, the word coming out softer than she expected, but enough to pause him. Marcus stopped, not abruptly, just enough to give her space again. He did not step closer. He did not step away. He simply remained where he was, present without pressing forward. Victoria studied him for a moment, her gaze more direct now, less filtered by the roles they both occupied. "Why did you step in earlier?" she asked. It was not the question people usually asked in situations like that. Not, "How," or, "Are you trained," or, "Do you work here often?" Just, "Why?" Marcus held her gaze for a brief second, then answered without hesitation. "Because you needed it," he said. No elaboration. No attempt to frame it differently. Just a statement, clean and complete. Victoria felt something in her chest shift again, sharper this time, not uncomfortable, but undeniable. "You did not think about whether you should?" she pressed, her tone still calm, but carrying a trace of something new. Curiosity, maybe. Marcus gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head. There was no time for that, he replied. Then, after a brief pause, he added, and it did not seem like something that needed permission. The words settled between them, quiet but firm. Victoria blinked once, processing not just what he said, but what it implied. A world where action was not filtered through layers of approval. A moment where the right thing was simply done. Without strategy. Without calculation. She exhaled slowly, her shoulders lowering just a fraction more than before. Around them, the ballroom continued its steady rhythm, unchanged, indifferent. But for Victoria, the edges of that world felt less solid now. Most people would have expected something in return, she said after a moment, her voice quieter, almost reflective. Marcus shifted the tray in his hand again, adjusting the weight slightly. Then it would not be the same thing, he answered. Victoria frowned slightly, not in disagreement, but in thought. What would not? Marcus met her eyes again, steady, unguarded. Helping, he said simply. The word landed with more weight than it should have. Or maybe exactly as much as it should have. Victoria looked away for a brief second, her gaze drifting toward the crowd, the conversations, the exchanges that suddenly felt louder than before, more transactional than she had ever noticed. Deals. Favors. Leverage. Everything moving with an expectation attached. She turned back to him, something softer in her expression now, though she would not have called it that. You talk like it is simple, she said. Marcus did not smile, but something in his posture eased, just slightly. It is, he replied. Then, after a beat, most things are. We just make them complicated. Victoria let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh, but not quite. For a moment, she said nothing. And in that silence, she realized something she had not felt in a long time. Not pressure. Not expectation. Just space. Marcus glanced briefly toward the floor manager across the room, then back at her. I should get back, he said, not as an excuse, not as a dismissal, just a statement of where he was needed next. Victoria nodded once, slower this time. Of course, she said. Marcus gave a small, respectful nod in return, then turned and moved away, disappearing back into the rhythm of the evening as if the conversation had never happened. Victoria remained where she was for a moment longer, her gaze following him until he blended into the background again. Then she looked down at her hands, empty now, and for the first time that night, she did not reach for another glass. Marcus did not look back. He rarely did. Once a moment was finished, it stayed where it belonged, behind him, not carried forward, not turned into something larger than it needed to be. He moved through the room with the same steady rhythm, offering drinks, clearing glasses, adjusting small details no one else noticed. The kind of work that kept everything running without ever being seen. But Victoria noticed now. Not all of it. Not yet. Just enough to make it impossible to ignore. She stood where he had left her, the space around her shifting as people moved in and out, conversations brushing past her without landing. Someone greeted her again. She responded. Automatically. Correctly. But her voice felt different to her own ears. Lighter. Less anchored to the usual weight of expectation. She excused herself once more, this time without explanation, and moved toward the far side of the ballroom where the noise softened and the lighting dimmed slightly. A quieter corner. A place no one important Needed to stand. The kind of place someone like Marcus would pass through, not remain in. She stopped near a small service table lined with folded linens and untouched silverware, her hand resting lightly against its edge. For a moment, she did nothing. No phone. No conversation. Just stillness. It felt unfamiliar. Not uncomfortable. Just unused. Across the room, Marcus paused near the kitchen doors, exchanging a brief word with another staff member before stepping inside for a moment. The door swung closed behind him, muting the sound of the ballroom just slightly. Victoria watched the space where he had disappeared, her gaze holding there longer than it should have. Then something shifted again. Not in the room. In her. A thought. Simple. Direct. She pushed herself off the table and began walking. Not toward the center. Not toward the people waiting for her attention. Toward the kitchen doors. Each step was measured, but not hesitant. Just intentional. A few guests glanced at her as she passed, surprised by her direction more than her movement. She did not acknowledge them. She did not slow. When she reached the doors, she paused for half a second, her hand hovering just above the handle. This was not her space. It never had been. She did not belong behind these doors. That had always been understood. Unspoken, but absolute. Her fingers closed around the handle anyway. The door opened with a soft push, and the atmosphere shifted immediately. The air was warmer. The lighting harsher. The quiet elegance of the ballroom replaced by the focused efficiency of a working space. Voices lower, quicker. Movements sharper. Purpose without performance. Marcus stood near a stainless steel counter, setting down an empty tray, his attention on the task in front of him. He had not expected her to follow. That much showed, just slightly, in the brief pause of his hands before he looked up. Their eyes met again, but this time, the space between them was different. Not curated. Not filtered through roles and expectations. Just real. Victoria stepped inside, the door closing softly behind her, cutting off the music almost entirely. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The quiet here felt different. Not heavy. Not charged. Just honest. She glanced around briefly, taking in the movement, the coordination, the rhythm of people doing what needed to be done without needing to be seen. For it. Then her gaze returned to him. "This is your world," she said, not as a question, but as an observation. Marcus wiped his hands lightly on a folded cloth, his posture unchanged. "It is where I work," he replied. Victoria nodded slowly, as if adjusting to the distinction. "In the other room?" she asked, her voice softer now, almost reflective. Marcus glanced toward the closed doors for a fraction of a second, then back at her. "That is where you work," he said. The simplicity of it landed deeper than she expected. Two worlds. Separated by a single door. And yet, somehow, for a moment tonight, they had crossed. Victoria stood there, just inside his side of it, realizing she did not feel the need to step back right away. And for the first time in a long time, she did not know exactly why. Victoria remained still for a moment longer, letting the unfamiliar rhythm of the kitchen settle around her. It was not chaotic, the way she might have expected. It was precise. Focused. Every movement had a purpose, but none of it was performed. No one here needed to impress anyone. They just needed to do their part. That difference stayed with her. Marcus reached for another tray, checking it quickly before setting it aside, his attention moving seamlessly from one task to the next. He did not rush. He did not slow. He simply worked at a pace that matched the room, not above it, not below it. Victoria watched him in that space, noticing something she had missed before. He looked the same here as he did out there. No shift in posture. No adjustment in tone. No version of himself for different rooms. Just, consistent. "You do not change," she said quietly, the observation slipping out before she could filter it. Marcus glanced at her, not confused, just considering her words. "There is not much reason to," he replied. Victoria tilted her head slightly, studying him more closely. "Most people adjust depending on where they are," she said. "Who they are with?" Marcus picked up a clean glass, inspecting it briefly before placing it in line with the others. "Most people are trying to be seen," he said. Then, after a small pause, "that changes how they move." The sentence landed with a quiet weight. Victoria felt it immediately, though she did not react outwardly. Her gaze drifted briefly across the kitchen, watching a line cook pass a plated dish to another staff member without a word, the motion smooth, practiced, unspoken. No one paused for recognition. No one needed it. She turned back to Marcus. "And you are not?" she asked. Marcus shook his head once, simple and steady. "Not for that," he said. Victoria's fingers curled slightly against her palm, a subtle reaction she did not notice. "Then what are you trying to be?" she asked, the question softer now, less analytical, more real. Marcus did not answer immediately. He set the last glass in place, aligning it with the others until it sat perfectly straight. Only then did he look at her. "Present," he said. One word. No explanation. No defense. Just that. Victoria felt something in her chest shift again, deeper this time, like a quiet recognition she could not fully name. Present. Not powerful. Not important. Not impressive. Just, there. In the moment. She let out a slow breath, her shoulders lowering just slightly, almost imperceptible. "That sounds simple," she said, though her voice carried less certainty than before. Marcus gave a small nod. "It is," he replied. "Until it is not." Victoria almost smiled at that, though it did not fully reach her face. Around them, the kitchen continued its steady rhythm, the soft clatter of plates, the low murmur of voices, the hum of something real and grounded. It was different from the ballroom. Not better. Not worse. Just, honest. She glanced back at the closed doors for a brief second, the music barely audible now through the barrier. Then she looked at him again. "Do you ever want to be on the other side?" she asked, her tone neutral, but the question carrying something beneath it. Marcus followed her glance toward the doors, then back to her. "I have been," he said. Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion, but in curiosity. "And?" she asked. Marcus picked up the tray again, steadying it in his hands. "It did not change what mattered," he said. Victoria held his gaze, searching for more, but he did not offer it. He did not expand. He did not explain. And somehow, that made the answer feel more complete. She nodded slowly, absorbing it, letting it settle without forcing it into something else. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was not empty. It was full of things neither of them needed to say. And for the first time that night, Victoria did not feel the need to fill it. Victoria did not rush to leave. That, more than anything, surprised her. There were always places she needed to be, people waiting, conversations that required her attention, decisions that could not wait. Time, in her world, was always accounted for. Measured. Optimized. And yet, standing here, she felt no urgency to return. The absence of it was unfamiliar. Almost unsettling. Marcus shifted slightly, adjusting his grip on the tray, his attention briefly moving toward a staff member who signaled from across the room. He gave a small nod, acknowledging without breaking the quiet space between them completely. He would leave soon. That much was clear. Not because he wanted to, but because he had something else to do. Something real. Something immediate. Victoria noticed that too. The difference between leaving because you chose to, and leaving because you were needed somewhere else. She glanced around the kitchen again, taking in the steady rhythm, the quiet coordination, the absence of performance. Then her gaze returned to him. "Do you ever get tired of it?" she asked, the question coming out softer than she intended, but more honest than most of what she had said that night. Marcus considered it for a moment, not dismissing it, not answering too quickly. "Of the work?" he asked. Victoria nodded once. Marcus gave a small shrug, not careless, just grounded. "Some days," he said. "But not in the way people think." Victoria waited, her silence inviting more without demanding it. Marcus continued, his tone unchanged. "It is not the work that wears you out," he said. "It is when you forget why you are doing it." The words settled into the space between them, quiet but clear. Victoria felt them immediately, not as a concept, but as something that pressed lightly against a place she had not examined in a long time. "Why you are doing it." She looked down for a brief second, her reflection faint in the polished steel of the counter beside her. For years, her answer had been simple. Build. Grow. Win. Provide. But standing here, those words felt incomplete. Not wrong. Just not enough. She lifted her gaze again, studying Marcus as if trying to understand how someone could move through the world with that kind of clarity. "And you remember?" she asked. Marcus nodded once. "I try to," he said. Then, after a small pause, "I have help." Victoria's brow furrowed slightly. "Help?" Marcus's expression did not change, but something softened in his eyes, almost imperceptible. "My son," he said. Just that. No explanation. No elaboration. But it was enough. Victoria felt the shift immediately. Not dramatic. Just grounding. The image formed without effort. A small apartment. A child waiting. A life outside of this room that did not revolve around titles or expectations. Something real. Something steady. She exhaled slowly, her shoulders lowering again, this time a little more than before. "That makes it easier," she said, though it sounded more like she was thinking out loud than making a statement. Marcus tilted his head slightly. "It makes it clearer," he replied. Victoria nodded, absorbing that distinction. Clear, not easy. She understood that difference more than most. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The kitchen continued its quiet rhythm around them, plates moving, voices low, time passing without announcement. Then, from beyond the doors, the sound of applause rose faintly, signaling something shifting back in the ballroom. A speech. A moment that likely required her presence. Victoria heard it. Of course she did. She always did. But this time, she did not move immediately. Marcus glanced toward the doors, then back at her. "They are probably looking for you," he said, not as pressure, just as a fact. Victoria held his gaze for a second longer, then nodded slowly. "They always are," she replied. But she did not sound as certain as she once would have. She took a small step back, her hand reaching for the door handle again, but this time, she did not open it right away. Instead, she looked at him once more, not as a CEO looking at an employee, but as a person trying to understand something she had missed for too long. "Marcus," she said quietly. He met her eyes. "Yes, ma'am." Victoria paused for just a fraction of a second, as if choosing her words more carefully than she ever had before. Then she said, "Thank you." Marcus held her gaze for a brief moment, then gave a small nod. "You are welcome," he replied. "No wait. No expectation. Just acceptance." Victoria nodded once more, then pushed the door open, stepping back into the world she knew. But this time, something followed her that had not been there before. And she could feel it, even as the music grew louder again. The moment Victoria stepped back into the ballroom, the sound returned all at once, music swelling, voices rising, the soft echo of applause pulling her forward before she could fully adjust. The world she knew was still there, unchanged, waiting for her to step back into it as if nothing had shifted at all. A man approached immediately, his smile practiced, his hand gesturing toward the stage where a speaker had just finished. "Victoria, they were asking for you," he said, his tone light but expectant. She nodded, her posture straightening automatically, her expression settling into the version of herself everyone recognized. Composed. Controlled. Certain. She moved toward the center of the room, heels steady against the marble, each step measured as always. But something beneath that movement felt different now. Not visible. Not obvious. Just present. She reached the edge of the small stage area, acknowledging a few familiar faces along the way, her responses precise, her timing perfect. The speech resumed, attention shifting, the rhythm of the evening continuing without interruption. From the outside, nothing had changed. Victoria Hale was exactly where she was supposed to be. And yet, as she stood there, listening, responding, participating, she became aware of something she had never noticed before. The space between moments. The pauses. The seconds where nothing was being said, nothing was being exchanged, nothing was being measured. They had always been there. She had just never stayed in them long enough to feel them. Her gaze moved across the room, not scanning for opportunity this time, not calculating, just seeing. A couple near the back laughing quietly over something small. A staff member adjusting a tablecloth no one else would notice. A glass being refilled before it was empty. Small things. Unseen things. Things that mattered in the moment. Her fingers relaxed slightly at her sides, a tension she had not realized she carried easing just enough to register. The speech ended. Applause followed. Someone turned to her, expecting a response, a comment, a direction. She gave it. Clear. Effective. Exactly what was needed. But when the moment passed, she did not immediately move to the next one. Instead, she paused. Just briefly. Just enough. And in that pause, she felt it again. That quiet shift. That presence Marcus had spoken about. Not overwhelming. Not dramatic. Just there. Her eyes drifted once more toward the far side of the room, toward the edge where he would be. And there he was. Marcus Reed. Moving through the same rhythm as before, unnoticed by most, essential in ways no one measured. He did not look at her. He did not need to. The moment between them had already happened. It did not need to be repeated. Victoria watched him for a second longer, then turned back to the people around her. But this time, when someone spoke, she listened differently. Not just to respond. Not just to move things forward. But to understand what mattered in that moment. A small shift. Almost invisible. But real. As the night continued, the patterns remained, the conversations, the expectations, the flow of a world built on structure and precision. But within that structure, something had opened. A space she had not seen before. A way of moving she had not considered. And it stayed with her, not as a thought, not as a decision, but as something quieter. Something steady. Something she would carry long after the music stopped and the room emptied. Across the ballroom, Marcus adjusted a final detail before stepping back into the background once more. He did not change the room. He did not try to. But somehow, in the smallest of moments, he had changed the way she saw it. And that was enough.